Hey everybody, this is the Sunday collab, and I'm Bridgette Dolgoff, and we have Dr. Lenny Thyme, and we have Gord Esau on, and we may have some more people joining, just depends. And we were going to start our conversation about time and ramifications about time because it seems like it's more restrictive than money. It's probably the most restrictive thing that we have and the most controlling. So you know, kind of a thing. So anyway, next week I won't be doing the collab. I will be working with a good friend of mine, Keith McHenry, who's the founder of Food Not Bombs. And I'm going to be attending some meetings down in Santa Cruz to help the homeless. And Keith is working on a union for the homeless so that we can defend them against the system and what's
Defend
happening.
them or defend us? Aren't we all homeless too?
Right, but I mean, the thing is what's happening in Santa Cruz is if, say, a girl has a baby and she ends up homeless, the the government comes right in and takes her baby from her. They don't try to help her. They don't try to assist her. They come in and they take all of their gear so they can't survive the winter. They are, routing them around. So we're talking about, the homeless that are like under the bridge. So, and trying to get them services, so that they can at least shower and, some other human, you know, things. So anyway, but more on that later when I know we're going to have some speakers that are coming to Santa Cruz next weekend, and to talk to us about, a lot of other groups that are kind of working on some of these, similar ideas.
Well, isn't it time when government fails to serve its people, even those with the least, that the government's no longer like, why do we need them then if they
Well,
can't look after people?
well, the thing is, these people haven't been looked after since the 80s. When when homelessness first started to appear in the United States. So, now it's epic proportions. You've got like 250,000 people migrating from California to Nevada within 4 to 5 years, starting with, the vineyard fires. People are
Yeah,
coming to our area on foot and, just all kinds of stuff that,
yeah,
it's
this isn't
shocking.
gonna. It's not just gonna end either.
No, and we have them all. I mean, Reno's small, and we have them living literally all over the streets here, in cars, abandoned RVs, on foot. It's pretty. It's reached kind of epic proportions here, and they just kind of ignoring it.
We've got them here too. Lots of homeless here.
Yeah, but this is a small. Reno's not that big, and we have the largest, homeless population now in the nation per capita,
Mm.
and we don't have the resources here, to manage what's going on. But anyway, so that's what I'll be next week. And so wanted to kind of start the conversation out on time. So hey, Lenny, you want to start talking about time and its ramifications and your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I don't think that we have the concept of time down correctly. There's really two concepts of time that we seem to get confused with each other. One is the idea of clock time, and the other is the idea of eternal time. And by setting up clock time to be the end all be all, looking at a clock, looking at a watch, looking at a calendar, we get the idea that these periods are all the same, when in fact I don't think that periods are the same at all. I think that sometimes we're in a space where our time goes rather quickly. Other times, like if we're waiting for something to happen, it can go very slowly. And so the idea of how time works really needs to be stepped back and look at, because too many people just think clock time is the be all end all, and that's all they function on.
Yeah, I was thinking about, a lot the last couple weeks about how even clock time is wrong, right? And that they continue to change the calendars on us, right? So every time we turn around, once we went from kind of natural world time order and we started living by a calendar and also days of the week, right? That's included. And so all of these structures, whoever they are, the people who want us to work and be enslaved and, punch a time clock and have a time clock in our own life, so all these different calendars, natural law would just kind of run on seasons, like what you need to do next. Okay, well, now it's the sowing season. We'll plant the seeds in the ground, and now it's the summer, where we caretake our food and maybe harvest some of it. Then we have the fall where we harvest most of the food and the crops, and then come into winter, and it's supposed to be like a very bare dormant time, where we hibernate.
I think that those seasons definitely are periodic and rotate in the same order all the time. The calendar that we're given with a week being five weekdays and 2 weekend days really is disruptive to the human psyche because it's not a pattern that anybody would logically think of for themselves. And so I think that they do keep us running around, but I think that in terms of setting up a meeting, the clock time is essential. We wouldn't know to have all been here at noon and what noon correlates to, that it's 9 o'clock on your clock and Gord's clock, but it's noon here. And if Victor was here, it would actually be 4 o'clock in the afternoon on his time. And so, or 5 o'clock. So the correlation of time to get it so that humans can interact with each other is a function that we need time for. But I sometimes wonder if that human scale is not absolute but relative, and that it seems like time functions the same, but that we're actually functioning on different scales, so that an hour could be a minute or a microsecond, or it could be 10,000 years, depending on where we are in the relative size scape. So relating time to size, I think, is really important in understanding how time works. And so a dog like Jin experiences what, 7 years in our single human year? But Jin ages as though 7 years was 1 year. So it makes sense for her to age that way.
Yeah. Well, and also too, I was thinking about New Year's and how asinine that is, even to participate in it, because like Australia, what goes off first, and they have midnight first, right? And then everybody kicks off, and so there isn't really a new year. Things are not experienced in a new year. And what if we were all more intuitive, right? And we were all more telepathic? Then we wouldn't need like time to be established for us. I mean, if there wasn't the keyword work involved, if people didn't have to make a living by making it to work on time, right? There probably time wouldn't exist the way that we have it existing.
There's no question that the idea of earning a living to make your keep is an artificial concept that has been imposed on us. And if it wasn't imposed upon us, we would not have come up with it. I think you can go back into the 1920s when Henry Ford actually decided that people had to be on a time clock to see when things really started losing it for we the people. Before that, it was just a matter of living with your relatives in a local space and getting done the things that were necessary to keep people going. Then all of a sudden, now we're being forced to do external work for the man, and he's not treating us very well, is he?
No. And that's, I think, the number one thing why I like farming so much is that I don't really need anything. I don't need to leave the land, Hey, Gord, you're kind of
Mm-hmm.
rattling around there.
I'm not doing a thing.
Or you're not? Oh, I was hearing a lot
I,
of paper rattling.
No, that's
Yeah, that
me that's rattling because I'm sitting outside.
Oh,
When
okay.
the wind blows, there's a little rattle to
Oh,
it.
okay. I just
So if
was making sure.
yeah,
Okay.
if that becomes a problem, let me know and I'll move back inside.
Yeah,
But
no
the
worries.
temperature is real nice outside today, so
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just wanted to know kind of where it was coming from. Okay, so yeah, so farming, one of the things I like about farming is you have your land, you have your animals, you have, what you're doing, whatever kind of season it is, whatever work that needs to be done. And it doesn't really, the only constraint most of the time is daylight. But you just get done whatever you can get done in the course of the day, and then shut everything down and then see what you got like the next, what you have going on the next day. But there, you don't need a car because you don't need to get anywhere. You don't really need a lot of these other things, that you think you need, which you think you need to make a living for to pay for. I mean, it's interesting, like I have clients that have retired, and I have some clients that are on kind of the fringe of retirement. And it's interesting, they don't really need me that much anymore once they retire because they don't have the stress and they don't have the health problems that they had while they were working. Um, and so, you start to watch what they need financially cut way down, and they can be a little bit more sufficient in a urban setting, without needing so much. But because of the stress, they end up spending a lot. They need, more supplements. They need more medications. They need to pay for a lot more things, to keep themselves going while they're working in the system. I mean, I love farming. I love to get up when it's dark and go outside and start moving the animals around, just seeing what they're doing. My time my time clock is mostly getting them, set up for the day, then coming in and having breakfast, whatever time that's going to be, and then um, going out and getting the work done that I need to get done, priorities, and then having lunch and then going back out. And sometimes in the summertime, the latest, you might have the last chicken that goes in at 9 o'clock and you've got to go shut the gate. So summers can be pretty long days from like 4 a.m. to, 9 p.m. But, and then winter, not a lot going on.
I found that when I lived out in Oregon, I was up with the sunlight, and by the time the sun went down, I was ready to go to sleep. But then when I moved cross country to an urban area now, I'm not at all connected to the outdoor clock. And so when my body gets tired, I go down to sleep, but it's much later relative to when I was on the West Coast. In fact, I think I'm almost on the same schedule on the East Coast as I was on the West Coast.
So how do you think that, living more indoors, I guess, or in a urban setting, how do you think, because you're so close to, just a few months ago you were living on the land, how do you think it's affected your mind, your health, um, your patterns of life?
The patterns are all completely different, but I needed the break from where I was because I had been in the same place for about 3 years and the patterns were starting to break down. I was more at the behest of other people and their whims, and I needed to reconnect back to my roots. So I traveled across country, came to visit with my mom, and it's been an entirely different environment, but it gives me a chance to go back to the roots that I grew up with and understand why I've turned the way I have, so that where I land next, I think I'll be more effective at tying back in to the natural settings of life. It really is an artificial setting to be in a town where, well, the place where I live is restricted to older folks. You have to be 55 or older to be allowed to live here. And so the world that I live in is totally created, totally artificial, but I can walk outside and right as soon as I go outside, the first thing I see when I open the door is a golf course. Now, golf courses are totally artificial outdoors. If it was normal outdoors, there'd be wooded area or field or something. But they put a lot of time into the maintenance of their golf course. And I can see that when things break down, that golf course is going to be totally important for growing food around here
Right,
because
but
that's
you'd
a
have to detox it first because it turns out golf courses are the most toxic areas.
yeah, I can tell that they put things on the course constantly, and there's always some sort of maintenance going on. But Florida has its own quirks, and the fact that southern Florida used to be the Everglades and was filled in to be built upon leads me to believe that when things start breaking down, it'll naturally go back to something more realistic as one of the first things that happens once the maintenance is no longer being paid for.
Yeah, no, there's a golf course that's out Verdi, which is kind of connected to Reno. Was a golf course out there that didn't make it financially, which is like asinine. You know, you put in like what, a $10 million golf course? I mean, really. You have to borrow all this money, you have to put it all together. You have to actually, you know, bulldoze off anything natural, all the topsoil and everything, and then you have to bring in all this fake and artificial stuff, put in all this concrete and fake water ponds, and you've got the sand dunes, so you're bringing in sand that doesn't belong there, and just all this other stuff, and then it doesn't make it right. It's open for 7 years, and then bankruptcy. It didn't get sold because it didn't make enough money. And so whenever I walk out there, the part that really makes me mad about it is I really feel like we should not be allowed to build housing or anything, right, at all near water. I think that there should be, a huge, I'm not sure exactly how many feet or yards there needs to be, but we should not be allowed to grow or, build anything near water. And so it's right on the river, this golf course.
In
So
Oregon, the river buffer is a 100 feet, I think, that you're not supposed to build within 100 feet of the edge of the river.
yeah, so the Truckee River, this golf course was right on the edge of. And so all those contaminants that they were spraying and fertilizing and poisoning, the golf course to keep it green in a desert, even in the middle of winter, it had green grass, right? All that stuff leached off and would pour off into the river. And then, once now what's happening is that nature is trying to kind of reclaim it, but that turf that they rolled in and put in, and then it has all that plastic, netting on the back of it and all this other stuff is really actually, it's 10 years now, I think, and the nature is still really having a really hard time with it. So I've thought a lot about, how to, design plans to reclaim that and then be able to clean it up and use fungi and just all kinds of different stuff, biodynamic remedies, and just spray for a couple of years remedies, and then be able to actually plant food on it, so that the microbes eat up all the contamination, and then be able to grow food, because what else are you going to be able to put there? Nothing.
Well, actually, if you look at how forests work, there's a sequence of plants that comes in. If you have a really hard fire that wipes things out, you get ceanothus and scrub pines and junipers and trees like that, which don't have a long lifetime, but which can condition the soil first. So then you get a succession of other plants coming in, and you don't get your good firs and pines and other evergreens coming in until like 40, 50 years after the what has been there has been done. So I
Right, but
think
this
you're
is
right.
desert. This is
Yeah.
desert, so we don't have any of that. When we have big fires that are in the desert forest, it wipes everything out. Like, I've gone up to areas where, there should be massive diversity in plants, and you have 25 years later. You might have some, pinyon pine trees. You might have a couple other conifers, and then you have sagebrush, maybe some rabbit brush, and then that's about it. So there's nothing really, and that's another thing that we really need to think about is, collecting, wild seeds, and then, people going into those kinds of areas and broadcasting seeds so that we have other, plants that are growing there.
It also takes water. And if you don't have a plan to actually get water to the plants, there are times when there's not enough natural water in the desert that those plants aren't going to make it. And
Yeah.
so choosing plants that you know can be done, can grow as a first growth probably is as important as what's going to come beyond it. But it takes intention.
Yeah.
And I think anybody who's going out and planting ground with intention has the wherewithal to make transformations of the ground. The biodynamics from Steiner is hugely important and mostly forgotten. And so it would be good if you could give people a quick overview of what Steiner thought when he was talking about using biodynamics, what the term means, and how it applies to what we're doing now.
Well, that's a pretty, that would probably take about 10 hours, but basically just the gist of it, okay? So Steiner was a nutritionalist. He was really big and educated, but he also he was very psychic, and he could go to places to collect information. And so the biodynamic remedies are basically on what he saw would be necessary in the near future on the planet. And the information was given to him, and then people, if they want, they can read. It's pretty out there, it's pretty heavy material, but you could read the 8 agricultural lectures of Rudolf Steiner. A lot of people probably won't be able to even wrap their heads around it, but it's about how we have the different levels of things working. First, carbon, which creates form. Carbon is like a really huge, positive carbon's like a super really huge important thing for the forms of living things to become what they need to be. Then, he talks a lot about the cosmic forces that actually, as we're standing up off the earth and the plants, that the cosmic forces come in and they have a pull, and they also start to contribute. So biodynamics is like energy systems, it's nutritional systems, it's preparations that are made from animals and plants, and structured water. Uh, there's a lot of components of time. Astrophysics kind of plays into it, the movements of things, also time, evolution, what we're evolving to, what other things are evolving to.
I
And
was I was impressed with the compost making and that the microbes would arise from the compost. They had to already have been there when we started, but over the course of time, just by adding water, the fertility of the compost buried within the bladder that we created, really, you could see the improvements so that when I used the compost the following year, there were still bones and other things that hadn't totally broken down, but the soil was a loam as opposed to a sand.
yeah, well, and I love what my one teacher at Steiner College used to say is that we want to create, a self-contained compost that doesn't heat up, because then we'll kill the microbes. So why invite them up from the depths of the earth where they're hiding? We have to bring them up. We have to give them something yummy, 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 yummy that they want to, sink their teeth into. And so creating these standing compost on land, then you bring the microbes up. And it's interesting to me because people are always like, people think that they're experts in compost and they know nothing about compost, because the very thing that they need, which is the microbes to eat up all the bad stuff on the land, right? They cook out, they let the compost piles get way too hot and the compost is killed. So all the nutrient is destroyed. All of the microbes are destroyed. Everything's destroyed in it.
How do you think time works in a compost pile? Do you think that from when you start the compost to when you harvest it is like a lifetime of the microbes, or is it several lifetimes of the different microbes? Or how would you imagine time works if you were a microbe within a compost pile?
I think it depends. I think it depends on if you get killed, like I think there are like different processes. So even in the body, we can say like microbes, if they're self-contained in a cell, which has got like an outside membrane. So compost that has a membrane, like a biodynamic compost, they'll go through their 4 cycles, which is like, starting to munch stuff down, getting it broken down, and then moving into the process of turning it into something that's can be used for, metabolic processes, right? And I think compost is exactly the same as how microbes work in the cells of the body, and it works the same way in the land. And it's taken me a while to really kind of understand it and Steiner's work, and then being able to put it all together, because I had to understand it from physical because of medicine and stuff like that I've been involved in. But a biodynamic compost is just like a cell in our body with the microbes in it, and a lot of it is determined on, you know, if the microbes get out, right, or they're not taken care of properly in the compost, then they're not going to really fulfill their mission, and they might move more into a damaging sequence where they're actually just breaking it down and there is no building it up. And so that's the other part, when we overheat a compost and we kill all those microbes, halfway through what they're doing, they don't get to the conclusion, which is the building up. So they get through the breaking down, then the compost gets too hot, cooks most of them off, creates a real acid state, and then the microbes go south if there are any microbes in there. And the key is like, keeping it as alkaline as possible, right? So that you have all those development of nutrients that go into the compost, so that's what you're spreading. You're spreading microbial mass, you're spreading nutrient density, and all these other things by keeping them in a closed organism like a cell in the body.
So would you want to use lime and other basic chemicals as part of the additives that you would put into your compost
Well,
initially?
that's why I use animals, because lime is the same as calcium basically. So what we want to do is we want to create more of a natural state. So that's why I like to put animals that die on the farm or roadkill or whatever else into my compost, because the fur and the bones and all of that's going to break down in a natural way, a biological way. If I have a place on the land that's just way too acid, like I just can't seem to get the acid down no matter what I do, then I may add lime. But lime may cool it too much to where the microbes stop working.
How do you measure pH when you're working the land?
Taste.
Yeah, well, as a chemist, I usually have a pH meter with me, and if I stir up ground within some water and then put the pH meter in it, it gives me a quick and dirty measurement that I can use. But I've also noticed that the behavior of the land changes whether it's acidic or basic, and that really you want just a slight basicity, something around 7.2, 7.4, in order to get there, but that there's a region where you can be too basic, just like there's a region where you can be too acidic. And then what you're growing makes a difference also. because things like tomatoes and peppers prefer acidic soils, whereas things more like potatoes and corn, Three Sisters, prefer more basic. So there's a lot of variability in land depending on what you're doing, and pH is one of those things that is worth having an adequate measure to tell you where you're going. It's not absolutely necessary, and in fact, you can use your sense of taste. One of the things I learned in chemistry early on was that if you put a chemical on your tongue and taste it, depending on whether it's bitter or sour or what, you could get a feel for the chemical. And now it's like you want to put something in your mouth, everybody goes ape shit. And it really, what they're telling you is don't use your senses, believe what we teach you. And there's a lot of chemistry that really needs to be rethought out from a base level. But chemistry was one of those areas where it's not as bad as some of the other sciences for making things up because chemistry at least has some practical application. I'm not sure that anybody anymore gets reality when they learn in school. I think you really have to do your digging for yourself and find other people who know, who can answer your questions once you've got a base level of expertise. And that so many people don't have a base level of expertise in anything that they can't put these concepts together.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is that, sometimes the plants are like the you know, telling sign. Like if you're growing things in your yard and you have in Reno, because we have so much sand, and it used to be covered by the Great Lahontan, which is like an ocean. And we have tufa. We have like coral tufa. It's called tufa. It's like this ancient coral rock structures all over the place. And a lot of the lakes that are still here are very alkaline, right? Because they're left over from the ocean. So a lot of the water tends to be very, very alkaline on top of it, which makes it really difficult to grow anything. And so if you are going to remedy soil in this area, you need to have quite a bit of an acid. You need to have like an acidity bite to it, which means that I can use, raw compost, raw animal compost into the sand and everything else, because it'll give it just a really heightened amount of acid. Because as I water the garden, the alkalinity between the sand and the water is so much so that it's really difficult to grow anything here. And so here you would have to put a lot of, like raw cow manure, raw horse manure. It doesn't really have to be broken down that much. You can just dig it right into it. It'll give it enough acidity and heat that it'll help to buffer against the alkalinity. And there are plants, like for example, your squash, zucchinis, things of that nature, cucumbers, those kinds of plants, they really don't like a lot of acid or heat. They like cool. So they're more on the alkalinity side. If you add too much heat or nitrogen type, like chicken poop, lots of kind of even broke down chicken poop or animal poop can be really acidy to it. And then what'll happen is the plant will grow, it'll flower a lot, but you won't get any fruit from it at all. And so when you have these indications where you put things into the ground and they grow and you don't really get a very good harvest from whatever it's supposed to produce, that's going to be an indication of what your soil's doing. That's why I always tell people to start out to grow green leafy vegetables and lettuce and kales and things like that, because those will pretty much grow in any kind of condition, and they don't really need a lot of soil remedy either one way or another.
It's a two-way also. They condition the soil as they're growing. And so leaving behind about a third of the harvest just to be a mulch to go back in the soil is so important. If you take and harvest your entire crop without letting any go to seed or any let to go back in the soil, you're essentially just using it as a one-time pump to create vegetables which don't work in converse. Whereas
Yeah.
I think a lot of the planting that we need to do needs to be in touch with the soil. Industrial agriculture has really changed the way the world works, and we need to go back to human scale agriculture rather than being this industrial take swaths of land and monoculture it to get crops. There's got to be better ways of doing things.
Well, and the thing about this is that, if you are growing organically, right? So this what we're talking about doesn't really apply in monoculture, even if it's organic, because they are going to use even organic fertilizers in monoculture to conjure the plant to do what they want it to do, which is still really not natural, because it doesn't mean that the foundation of the nutrient is actually in the soil that's working with the plant, right? And all the energetic forces and everything else, that are needed. But one of the things that I always do is that nitrogen likes to get held in the roots of plants, right? So I never, I may let some of my crop go to seed, depends on how good the crop was. But the other thing is too, is that once I take the stalks off, I'll usually cut the stalks down to the ground, and then I try not to leave, anything exposed, but I will leave all the root systems in the ground, because what'll happen is that all that nutrient and nitrogen that I built over that period that's locked in those roots in the soil stays down there, because if I pull those roots out, it's exposing all that nutrient that's down in there to the air, to the sunlight. And so it's better just to cut those stalks off, and then you can recompost those plants, which are inevitably going to help, because you're going to put that compost back on the lands, full system. That's sustainability. But leaving the roots in, because the roots are also going to be food for the microbes that are in there. Because if you bald it, make it bald, and you take out all the plant material, pull out the roots, then there's really nothing for the microbes that you're generating in that area to eat or consume. There's zero. So the
Not to
root
mention the fact that the roots create spaces underground so that there can be circulation of air and oxygen.
and water, so the
Yeah.
water knows how to run down into the land. So yeah, so leaving the roots is like, I'm not really sure. So I'm not real big on leaving plants on top of soil because of mold and fungus, because those are things that we don't really want to get into where we're growing our food. Because if our plants come up and we've created mold and fungus because things are rotting on the top, that could be, cause a chemical malfunction in the plants that we're going to grow. Can cause confusion, and then also it's not really good for the health of humans.
I know out in Oregon where I was growing, one of the things was to get things to reseed themselves, and the chard reseeded real nice. The amaranth really didn't, but the amaranth got hit hard by the deer and the elk once they found it. That was really tasty for them. And so the roots of the amaranth, I'm sure, was still around. And before I left, I noticed that it was still growing in certain places. There was pretty good migration from where we started things of different edible plants that were getting to different places. But like with the mullein, I didn't really clear the mullein from one year to the next. And in fact, mullein's a 2 year cycle. So you get the small plants the first year, and then they shoot up to the stalks the next year. And what I ended up doing last year before I left was cutting down the stalks and placing them on top of the next place where I was going to compost. But then I left before I got to composting there.
So anyway, so maybe like a definition, but So we have GMO farming, right? Which is based on seeds that they put into the ground and use special fertilizers. But the seeds actually have the pesticides and chemicals inside the seed.
Yeah,
So as
GMO, genetically modified organisms.
yeah, so as they grow, they're supposed to defend against, mold, fungus, um, insects, and all this other stuff. But they're actually just poison, and that doesn't clear out. And when people eat that, that stuff goes into their body and can cause long-term liver and kidney damage because you're eating poison. And so even with gas or like ethanol, corn ethanol that they put into the fuel, that's also poison, and I always think about like when people suck gas and they get it in their mouth, not only is the fuel poison, but the corn ethanol is super poison, right? And you're getting that into your mouth, and then, you're going to put it into a gas can or whatever else. It's horrific. But also it's releasing poison. They know that bees that collect pollen from GMOs die. They get neurological damage. And that's what happens to people too, is GMOs can also cause neurological damage.
I think society causes neurological
It
damage.
does. So then you have the GMO crops and the way that the GMOs are handled and managed. And then you have, I'm going to put monoculture. I'm going to put monoculture in there because monoculture can be called organic, but say, for example, monoculture, just because it's organic doesn't mean that it has any nutrient in it. Because, for example, like oranges, if they're growing in an orchard, even if they're organic, they aren't growing other plants around those trees to actually help create and take away things, in a biodiverse way with the fruit. And they and so they also will bring in bees from other areas you know um, to get the pollen and help, like the orange or almond trees, which is a monoculture. So they could say, oh yeah, well, our orchards or whatever are biodynamic, or we have a huge corn crop, our farm is mostly organic corn, but because it's not grown biodiverse with all of the insects, the pollinators, there aren't a lot of other plants that are in there that can actually help, even on the outside of those areas. Um, because there's no biodiversity, it could be organic because they don't really have any chemicals in it, but it's not biodiverse, and, you know, probably not going to have a lot of nutrient density from those plants, right? So there are some monocultures that also could be GMO, but between GMO and organic, there's industrial and commercial, where they might not have a poison GMO seed, but they are using chemicals and poisons on the soil and the plants to change their chemistry to get them to grow something that they normally wouldn't grow because they don't actually have the stuff that they need in the soil, right? So not really working together. And then you have the monoculture, which can be commercial, industrial farming. Um, Even if it's organic, is not going to have a lot of not a lot of nutrient density. One of the things I've talked to people about that have orchards, that I've gone in and consult, because everybody thinks I'm crazy, but is that every year they need to dig like about a 6-foot hole around the plant, right? Dig it out, not hurt roots or anything, and then put, some compost in there, like biodynamic compost or compost that's fairly, chemical pesticide free, and then cover it with like wood chips, right? So that way you can start increasing the microbial mass so that the microbes will start to dig holes, and aerate the soil around the roots of the trees. So then the trees are going to hold more water in those areas. More water will get down to the groundwater because it's more open and it's accepting, it's becoming moist. The microbes are eating down the compost and the wood chips and actually creating a better environment and also giving the nutrient that is needed to the trees. But people are lazy, and they like to do things the way that they do. And I also tell them to plant, medicinal herbal plants around that flower around these orchards, so that they can bring in bees to help collect pollen and help pollinate the trees. And then the bees have enough food, and they also have medicinal plants to help offset whatever they need to offset. Then you have like organic. A lot of organics that we buy in the store are monoculture. They're not really sustainable. They're not biodiverse. They're not ecologically friendly. Um, and but they are organic, and a lot of them can be genetically modified hybrids. I mean, not like GMO that are super poisonous, but hybrid, so that the apple tree, all the apples grow the same size, they all look the same, because they found that, like Americans are really picky. They don't like to have apples that are all different sizes from the same tree. The apples have to be fairly clean. A way to know if your organic apple is really, really organic or not, and if it's old heirloom variety, is if you cut it open and you wait to see how long it's going to turn brown on the inside. If it starts to turn brown immediately, you know that you have an older heirloom, which is a non-hybrid. If it takes a while for it to turn brown, then you know that you have organic hybrid. And I don't think that hybrids, I mean, obviously we need to feed the population, but the problem is that hybrids are not good either, because there's been something changed in their actual seed, in their genetics, right? And we want to go back to older types of food, right? Because that's the food came, then
Well,
we came, and that's the way that we need to eat.
I
And
think the model is broken right now. I think that most Americans seem to think that their vegetables come from the market and that they don't go back to. We really need to get back to the earth and grow our own food, and that's just not what is being promoted by the society right now.
right. So the thing with the organics is that I always tell people this. I've been telling people the same story for like the last 25 years. When they first hybrided a lot of the tomatoes, and when they first hybrided the tomatoes like 25 years ago, um, what they did was they sliced and diced the seed and put shrimp gene into the seed, right? So now we have a shellfish organism that's in the seed of most tomatoes, so that the tomato could grow in cold climate, and also a tomato would last indefinitely in your refrigerator, right? But the problem with that is that nobody really has thought about is that what if the person, a child, has a really strong allergic reaction to shellfish, ends up eating, a hybrid tomato that has a shrimp, gene in it, and dies as a direct result, and nobody can figure out where the kid got the shellfish. So even organic tomatoes, most of them are hybrid. So you have these issues with a lot of organic food. So it's not just how the food is grown, but the types of seeds that you are accumulating to grow.
Can you
Um,
take a moment and explain what a hybrid actually is?
well, a hybrid is like a seed that would have, say, we had originally like a heirloom tomato. Man, Gord has all kinds of orbs that are just flying around. I just keep seeing orb after string orb, and on his video, string orb after string orb going on in there.
They
Eh,
like me, those herbs.
yeah. Anyway, so a hybrid is where the natural seed was taken, and it was, its DNA is broken apart uh, molecularly, and then they actually inject a new set of DNA into the seed to get an outcome that they want, like the tomato with the shrimp gene that was, put into the DNA strand.
So it's a lot different than just growing two different similar things together and letting them genetically mix.
Right. It's actually forced,
Okay.
to increase. I mean, a lot of it was to increase, food production for an ever growing society that demanded food that if you took the heirloom seeds and, grew them organically and sustainably and ecologically, couldn't make enough food for the
Well,
population.
how about giving us a little bit of review of your show from yesterday when you had Stephen Smith on talking about seeds?
Oh, isn't he just special? He's just so
I enjoy Stephen a lot, yes.
he well, I don't know how much we talked about seeds yesterday, but we talked in the past, we talk about seeds in a way where you have the native, the ancient, and some hybrid, or I mean some heirloom seeds that are originals, right? They're the original seeds. Some of the seeds that he has in his collection, because he is part native, he has traveled all over and collected. He has the largest native corn seed collection in the world. In some cases, there aren't any people left tribally to hand these seeds off. And, sometimes he'll get like 20 of them. He has one type of seed, corn seed, that he believes is like around 7,000 years old. And so we talk a lot about the genetics of that and the energy codes that are in it, because those seeds come with their own virtual, reality, their own holographic frequency, their own codes, computer system codes. I mean, some of those seeds will even have like barcodes looking things on them, and when you plant them into the ground, it not only changes the water, changes the soil, changes the whole frequency of the area, can open up actual doorways. I've seen it where it brings in what it needs from someplace else that you don't even know where. Also can change the reaction of people. People aren't settled, they're not okay. Yesterday, we were talking about writing books, and from, having grown some of these native seeds that have their own being to it, and wherever you decide to plant them, they take over, and you have to be kind of prepared for the energetic stuff that's going to radically change in that area. And if people haven't done a lot of work, personal work, and they have a lot of stuff hidden, these seeds will bring it about, and it will create violence. The seed doesn't mean to create the violence, but it's trying to clear up the problems, right? Because it's trying to, like an acupuncture needle in the soil. And once it starts to grow, it starts an energetic expansion process. So one of the things I've talked a lot about with other people who work with native seeds and who are growing native seeds and trying to return them back to the native people and to the population is that, I want to write like a small book about how, kind of like sort of an instructional manual to kind of prepare people for, if they choose to grow some of these varieties. And like Steven said, he doesn't allow right now, there are some of his seeds in his collection that he doesn't allow out, because he's not sure that people or the land in those areas, people will be able to handle it.
Well, you had some interesting observations when you were growing corn and marijuana plants together
Oh my God. I
in
know.
last year or the year before last.
I know. Hey,
The
yeah,
Yes,
go ahead.
I wanted you to talk about that a little bit, about how plants affect each other and how they communicate.
Yeah. Can you just hold the conversation for just 1 minute? I've just got to step away for just 1 second.
Okay. Yeah, I find that my background as a chemist has let me believe in things that now, after I've thought about it down the road, don't necessarily have the same orientation as what I was taught, but that the background of what I was taught establishes some good fundamental principles to work with. And so when we talk about things like positive carbon, that's one of those things that conceptually, to me as a chemist, organic means that things are based on carbon structure. It doesn't necessarily mean the biological food orientation of organic, which is grown under certain conditions that are specified so that you can say that you're organic. But the biggest thing that is involved in plant growth is having good, clean water. And that if the water is structured and oriented, I think the water brings an intelligence that works with the seed and the plant in order to develop something where the positive carbon and the water combine to make the organic structure.
Yeah, I'm back. I just wanted to put something here. Hold on one second. I just want to put here because it's just biodynamics is beyond organic, right? So it's kind of like it's at the top of the
Jane?
farming industry. Right. So I wanted to put this in here because, we put links at the bottom of these videos once we get them up on the Think Collab, but talk about Demeter International.
I hate when you give Wikipedia.
I know, but
That's just basically telling people to go someplace to get only part of the knowledge.
right. But it's really hard to find a lot of this kind of information, especially in the United States, unless you're actually directly involved in it. And so I'm working on this year, I'll be involved in the first ever program in the United States to get certified Demeter so that I can go out and certify farms, right? Mostly probably biodynamic farms, but we'll see how that goes. But Demeter International, so this is kind of like description. Certification is difficult to come by and must be renewed annually. Demeter's biodynamic certification requires biodiversity and ecosystem preservation, soil husbandry, livestock integration, prohibition of genetically engineered organisms, and viewing the farm as a living holistic organism. The certification verifies the fulfillment of standards on behalf of the farmers, which in turn guarantees the high quality food production to consumers. This is a reward by receiver of the higher price of food certification with Demeter labeling, ranging from 10 to 30% on average higher. Demeter International is the largest certification organization for biodynamic agriculture, is one of 3 predominant organic certifiers. That's internationally. Its name is a reference to Demeter, the Greek goddess of grain and fertility. Demeter biodynamic certification is used in over 50 countries to verify that biodynamic products meet international standards in production and processing. The Demeter certification program was established in 1928 and as such was the first ecologically label for organic produced foods. So it's not just organic, it has to meet a lot of criterias in order to get the Demeter certification, which is way higher than organic. You couldn't have an organic monoculture farm and get a Demeter certification.
Have
Would
you
never
been
happen.
on farms that are already Demeter certified?
Yeah, I mean, they had to pay a lot because they had to have people come in from Europe to certify their farms. And we do have, you start to see on some of the labeling, periodically you'll come across something that'll have the Demeter certification in the US. And, you can go online to look up just Demeter, let me see,
So if you
certified.
went to your grocery store, would you be able to find Demeter on a label?
Yeah, you would if it was organic and it met Demeter certification. So let's see. Yeah, so I'm trying to see if there's like a product list in the United States for the, different kinds of products. I'll have to look for that and see. But I know that there are sugar. There's sugar that is wine. There's a lot of biodynamic wine in Sonoma. Uh, you know, the wine country, a lot of vineyards, even like Colorado, a lot of their vineyards are biodynamic
So
wine.
Demeter is a biodynamic certification.
Yeah, mostly people that have biodynamic farms are going to know about Demeter, but any farm could get if they follow if they fall into the criterias could get a certification from Demeter, but mostly it's going to be biodynamic
What
farming.
percentage of the farms now are biodynamic and what percentage of the
Uh,
biodynamic farms are Demeter?
Well, I think everybody strives for biodynamic farm to get their Demeter certification, but the soil has to be really clean for a long period of time, and you have to have farm diversity. So you're going to have an older farm in the United States in order to have probably a Demeter certification. It's going to take, quite a bit of time. But US, maybe, I don't know, 1% of the farms are Demeter certified.
Not very
Not
much.
much. And, in Russia, Russia is using a lot of the biodynamic work to cure all the Chernobyl, radiation issues using the barrel preparation. So right now, I think they're like the top country in the world using that, are using biodynamic processes and preparations. So they're, there's this motivation in Russia. Right now, they're growing ancient grain. They're growing the most ancient, grain wheat in the world. It's all organic, biodynamic, and they're moving towards being the largest, organic, food producer in the world. So, you can see this Anastasia biodynamic movement, is really taking, speed. And I mean, they're going to be the country to go to here pretty quick for people to go and actually learn, like heads of state of other countries should be going there. I actually sent Putin, like you could, I don't know if he ever got it, but I sent him a letter saying, could I be your, you know, um, ambassador from Russia, to the US, because I would specifically like to come to Russia and see what you guys are doing on the front line of food. And so that I could, be able to partner with the US so that maybe we could get agriculture moving in a whole different direction in the US.
Well, that's going to require something happening with the current system of corporate agriculture, because as long as corporate agriculture is specifically concentrated on profits, they're not going to change the ways that they use that they find currently profitable. Unfortunately, agriculture this past year in the United States was severely impacted by the weather. Maybe
Yeah.
you can talk about what some of the dynamics that we're seeing from this past year are about.
Well, it's hard to say because I have, they're just kind of like pieces, right, of what's going on. And, the thing is, I think people have to kind of start where, in the US, I think even it's on if you dig deep enough, you can find it even on the USDA website. And remember, like any government organization pumps its numbers, right? Makes them bigger than they are, right? So if we take what the USDA is saying, that they can only, in the United States, over the last 20 years, they only grow because, more people keep coming into the United States, and there's just more food that's required, and less food that's being grown in the United States. I think there's like it was 9 billion, but I think it got raised this last year because of all of the destruction of all the farming, the payouts and things like that. But they pay farmers $9 billion a year. You can get part of that subsidy not to grow anything on your land. So there is this whole thing of that you know you're not growing stuff on your land. You could get some partial money for that. If you do grow, you only get some of that agricultural money if you grow the selected GMO crops, right? Which is canola oil or soy product, soybean, wheat, genetically modified wheat, and then the other big one. Well, they like also sugar beets because they're trying to get the sugar beet to replace the corn sugar, because too many people know about what corn, genetically modified corn is, and the corn syrup that's going into the products, because it's killing people. It's causing kidney failure, right?
Yeah, high fructose
Diabetic.
corn syrup is one of those things that if I see it on a label, I avoid the product.
Right. So then there's the corn that's genetically modified, and they use the corn and ethanol for the fuel. They also use the sugar beets. This is a really horrific thing that they're using it on. They use it in a spray. They make a spray out of it, and then they spray the roadways. So to make the roadways not slick with ice. So wherever you see those lines, those like, lightly lines that are on your pavement in the winter, that's sugar beet, which is pure poison and pure pesticide, GMO, and that goes into your waterways, right? So people, it's unbelievable, like where they put a lot of these products that are, GMO. This is like actually pretty shocking. All the different places that they use this stuff. Um, but in the US, so if the USDA is saying that over the last 20 years that the USDA and all their, related, it's going to be commercial or industrial farms and GMO farms. These don't really include organic farms. They don't include biodynamic farms, because usually people with biodynamic farms and organic farms, for the most part, only serve their local community if they have anything extra or leftover, which means that people are going to be buying CSA boxes for those foods, which means you pay in for 17 weeks of a certain amount of produce, and it's farmer pick. Whatever the farmer has to put into that box every week for you is what you're going to get. So usually it's prepaid for by the public. So the organic and biodynamic statistics are not part of the USDA statistics. But the US,
CSA, community supported agriculture.
yeah, and that's biodynamic. That was started, that's a biodynamic offshoot. A lot of people, even in the organic movement, don't know that. I mean, there's whole books that have been written on it about, because it's associative economics, which is something that Steiner was involved in,
So, how do people find their local biodynamic growers?
Well, we have none in Nevada. So that kind of tells you something. Um, all you have to do is look up biodynamic farms in your area, biodynamic farm in Michigan, biodynamic farming. And usually, if people do have their stuff online, then usually it'll throw it up and you'll be able to, find those kinds of movements. But you can always maybe even find, CSA in your area, go out looking, like if you have a Whole Foods or you have a co-op, a food co-op, they're going to know where all of the local community farms are. And then another thing I always tell people is if you do have farms that you are buying food from, whether it's in a co-op or sometimes Whole Foods, some Whole Foods are better than other Whole Foods. They will buy from the local community, some don't. Just depends on how much farming is going on in those areas. Nevada is a desert. It also is a food desert, so we have nothing. I mean, we really don't really have anything. But if the USDA is saying that nationwide that their farms are only growing for 1% of the population, right? That they only produce enough food for 1% of the population, is pretty frightening. That means that 99% of all the other food, right, that people are buying on average, whether it's organic, industrial, or, GMO, is being brought into the United States, which means that you have to pay for that. So what happens when other countries don't like the USA? What happens when other countries don't want to continue to grow food for the United States? That means that we don't get that food. And when we're bringing food into the United States, what are the ethics and morals of those farmers in other countries? Like what, we have to look into. If you're getting tomatoes from France, go look at what organic tomato farming, what all the laws and regulations are. And you might find, wow, France has really high standards for organic farming or what's produced to the population, but maybe Mexico, not so much. We get a lot of food from Mexico. A lot of people get E. coli and salmonella poisoning from a lot of the produce in Mexico. And why is that? It's because they have farms that they're using the same agricultural ditches as, upstream animal farming. And we're talking not, good holistic animal farming. We're talking like, feedlots with animals that are producing tons of urine and fecal matter that are going into the agricultural ditches, which, produce farmers downstream are spraying. So we also have to look at the food that we're buying and we're getting into the country and what countries that it comes from, because of contamination, whatever else, and whatever their rules and regulations are, that determine how they process their farms and
The
how they
the United States doesn't have country of origin labeling though.
they
So
do. If you just have to wear glasses and you have to look at the little sticker on the food for the most part. And with like a lot of the vegetable produce, they usually don't have country of origin, especially if it's commercial. But I know that if it has to put a sticker on it, like it's an avocado or a banana or an apple, it will, in the little code, you won't be able to read it. You'll have to get a magnifying glass to figure out where the country of origin is. So the other thing too is because we're bringing in 99% of the food, even if it's organic, they will, gas it and spray it. Remember, like when it passes into U.S. customs, that anything that is sprayed, they usually radiate it, and then they spray it with formaldehyde, right, to kill any kind of insects or whatever else, or molds or fungus that may be migrating into the U.S. So just because it's organic doesn't mean that when you get it, it's organic, right?
so is it better to wash your produce before you eat it, or is it better to not wash your produce before you eat it?
Well, I mean, and if you grow your own produce and you use organic ways, I wouldn't wash it. I'd rinse it a little bit, and then I would eat it. Maybe just get like some of the chemtrails off of it. But if you are going to a store where you're having to buy your food, I would wash the poop out of it. And what I would do is, make sure that I try to buy as close to my house as possible. So that way, it's not crossing state lines where it might get more radiated, and from other countries where it's getting radiated and sprayed with formaldehyde. But also, organic farming has a tendency to use natural things like copper. I know about 5 years ago, there was some people that were getting like kidney failure. Because they were juicing a lot. Well, it turned out that they were ingesting way more copper than they should in their diet. So if an average person just ate, one, head of celery over 2 weeks, probably wouldn't be a problem that they sprayed the copper on it to keep the insects and stuff off. But because, they're juicing a head of celery and whatever else that's been sprayed with copper as a natural insecticide, they get copper poisoning, which can, cause a lot of serious problems. But what I tell people, the best thing to do is either, take a whole lemon and squeeze the whole lemon into like, some cool water in your sink. And when you get home with your groceries, or you can take a cup of, a half a cup of apple cider vinegar, put it in the water, swish it around. And then I tell people they should dump everything that they get that's produce, that's washable, all your fruit, your vegetables, lettuce, whatever else, and then put it into the sink and let it set for, like maybe 10 minutes, and then swish everything around really well. And then, use water to rinse it off, and then put it all on a towel or whatever and let it dry, and then put it into your refrigerator. So that way, that everything's been washed, especially if you're going to do things like juice or do smoothies, because you're going to ingest even a lot of organic product. The other thing too is that because a lot of stuff's brought in, or that gets to your market, again, even if it's organic, it's hybrid. So the other thing too is like lettuce loses all of its nutritional value, most leafy vegetables, if it had any nutritional value to start off with, we'll lose it within 3 days. So most of the time you're going to get organic lettuce or whatever that's going to be, at least a week old. So whatever you're buying, is probably not going to have any nutrient in it anyway. Green beans lose like 50% of their vitamin C nutritional value. within 3 days after they're picked. So
It
you're pretty
really
much,
pays to go to the farm and get things fresh as possible, to get the most nutritional value out of your vegetables. Yes.
yeah, I would say so. And, less cooking of them, eating them more raw. Because once you cook it, once things are homogenized and pasteurized, then all of the nutrient is basically cooked out of them. And I really thought about this process too, because this summer, I took the wild crafting herbal medicine program. So I go out and I actually find the plants that are more native, that are prolific growing, and then I collect the medicines from it. Pain, autoimmune system disease, and inflammatory is kind of like what I focus in and kind of specialize on. So I kind of decided with tinctures that, the plants are going to have a lot of minerals in them, silicons, silica, and lots of other things. But I became like more worried. Some of the processing of tinctures, even when the plants are organic, it depends on the herbalist. Like the process may be, you have to get the plant material out of the plant by extraction, which is you use alcohol. At least you want at least a 40 grade, clear type of alcohol, like a vodka. You can use brandies and things like that as well, or Everclear. You could get really high potency. And then, you allow the plants to sit in, for however long that you want. Usually at least, I like to do at least 2 months. And in a dark place, where it's not going to be super hot and they're not going to be disturbed, but you let the alcohol pull out the medicines in them. But there's this other, process that people use, and it was one that my teacher taught me, but I decided I didn't really like it, because knowing everything that I do about farming and the cooking and blah, 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 I didn't want to lose any of the plant medicines. And so what happens with some of the tinctures is people will cook off the alcohol, so that it makes the tincture taste better for the public. But um, I don't really like that process, because I have to cook it at a high enough level that if there is anything really subtle in that medicine, I'm going to lose it. I've cooked it out.
Yeah, there's two things going on there. One is that certain components will extract into the alcohol, others will not extract into the alcohol. And second, both temperature and light are chemically reactive. And so you do, once you start raising the temperature, then the easier chemical reactions will start taking place. So there really is a lot to do in paying attention to the handling when you're making tinctures and things like that.
And another thing too that I really thought about was, um, where am I going to keep these medicines? So what I did was I actually got a storage unit where there is no cell phone tower, there's no cell phone reception in that area. There's no, microwave energy that's there. There's no electrical systems in this storage unit that I got to put all my medicines in. So on top of it, I'm not, it might change if I send the medicines to somebody in the mail and whatever those gets looked at or radiated or whatever else. But for the most part, I've tried to do the right thing on multiple levels, with making sure in the way that I can in an urban setting, because obviously I can't really bring them to places where I live, because there's going to be heavy microwave radiation because of the smart meters and the dirty electric running through the buildings and things like that. So I wanted to try to keep the medicines as clean as possible. So really, it's been an interesting journey, with everything that I've known and the wild crafting of medicines, and trying to keep their potency, and just, on so many different levels, having to really monitor where they go, how I process them, even my energy that goes into the application, because of my imprinting, because there is a lot of water that's involved in the plants and the alcohol. So I have to be really careful about even how I'm feeling or what's going on with me, because I don't want that kind of stuff to actually go into the medicines either.
Yeah, I think that the medicines, the plants, must have a different feel for time than we have as humans, and that maybe just the one single growing system is an entire lifetime for the plant, depending on whether it's an annual or perennial, it can still keep its consciousness going. But if you figure that that one season of growth is like an 80-year lifetime in the course of a human lifetime, now you can see how much different the plants experience the nature of time than what we as humans experience, and get some ideas of the shape of time in reality, because I think time right now is mostly a human construct that we use to blur how time really works. I don't know, it's getting late. Perhaps we should
Yeah.
wrap up our conversation.
Yeah. So last year when I was wild crafting plants for 6 months, that's where time, this whole concept of time really started to chisel at me, because you could say at mid June is when you should start harvesting St. John's wort, wild St. John's wort. It's going to be ready. But there's a technique that you can use with the flower by rubbing it on your hand. And if you get like a crimson red color, you know that it's ready to harvest. But if you don't get that, it's not ready to harvest, right? It doesn't have the pain. And contrary to what people buy St. John's wort, it's a pain medicine. And I don't know why it's sold as an antidepressant, but it is one of the most unbelievable internal and external pain remedies that we could possibly use in the United States. It's unbelievable for pain. So when you go out to harvest it, you have to keep going out there and testing it, right? You have to find it first, because a lot of the commercial rancher um, cattle farmers get rid of it, excuse me, because they don't want their cattle eating it, and they consider it an invasive plant, and all these issues, and so they actually eradicate it. So you can't even like cross state lines with it, because the ranchers, monoculture people have a heart attack over it. um, and it shocks me, kind of a thing. But St. John's wort I had to play around with, because at different elevations, it's going to be ready at different times. And this last year, for whatever reason, it wasn't really ready until like the beginning of August. So I could start going out there mid-June, but I had to keep going out there for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so I tell people the reason why, you know, herbal medicines like mine are a little bit more expensive is because I have to do all that work. I have to drive out there, I have to keep testing the plants, I've got to find them. And they're on their own time frame, working with the sun and water and environmental conditions, that things that I have to monitor to make sure I collect it. Some of the best plant medicines come from plants that are biannuals, which means that they grow for 2 years, but they grow two processes. So
Like
most of them,
mullein.
yeah, well, and thistle, right? Mullein, teasel, just a lot. It actually shocks me at how many they're out there. So when they first grow from a seed, they grow a root system and then some leaves, right? And that's about all they do until the next summer. And then the next summer they grow a stalk, they grow more leaves, and then they usually flower, and then they go to seed, right? So, um, and like for mullein, the root is super good for the type of inflammatory disease that you can get on the muscle that is connected to the bone, right? And in some cases, old herbalists called it the bone healer, right? So if I want to get into somebody's had tissue damage, or they had a broken bone or whatever else, and all of it's not healing real well, I can give them mullein root to kind of help that, right? Help cure what's going on deep within. But I have to get that root before at the end of the summer of the
Of the
first
first year.
grow.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if I let it go for winter, it starts to move into the process that it's going to grow a stalk, which means that the plant might even digest part of its root in order to get that stalk to grow.
Yeah, and then the second year, the leaf and the flowers both are great for respiratory.
Yeah, and you know what's even you know what the flower is even more amazing for?
What's that?
Well, you could put it in olive oil. You collect a whole bunch of those little mullein when they're beautiful little yellow flowers. You can delicately pull them off, and you put a whole bunch of them into a little jar of olive oil. And then you want to make sure that you filter a lot of it off because you don't want any little teeny particles getting stuck in your ear. But it's one of the best ear infection remedies of all time. But you can see how complicated it is to go out and have direct contact with the plant and collect the medicine. Like mullein has different stages of medicine collection that's necessary.
Yeah, I was lucky to have mullein and St. John's wort and chamomile on the property that I was caring for in Oregon. So those are things I'm familiar with. Besides St. John's wort and mullein, you've got horsetail. What other salves and creams do you have?
Well, I'm working on my own line of salves, for pain killing and inflammatory issues. And I'm also getting ready to create some analgesics, that are like more liquid, which penetrate, the tissues more. So I'm working on a whole line of those. I've just got to finish getting those done. And then I also have yarrow this last year I collected yarrow. I have St. John's wort that I developed in oil so that I can use in salves, and I also have it in tincture for internal and external pain.
Plus, you
I
have
a-
teasel.
I have what?
Teasel?
I do have teasel. Teasel is unbelievable with Lyme disease. It's like it cures it. It's an unbelievable thing, but I also do a different protocol with it. So for example, people, if I do a medical, or herbal nutritional consultation, I'll put them on some other things. Like people can buy teasel tincture. You got to be really careful with it. That what it does is it heats up your tissue from the inside out, which starts to kill all the parasites that you got from the Lyme disease. That's what's the problem is that you're parasitic ridden. And antibiotics will cause parasitic growth, right? So T-cell can get rid of it, but there's some things that you want to take with it. Like for example, you want to take some good liquid iodine. Like I like the biotics liquid iodine forte, super awesome. To get the thyroid really kicking some butt before you take the T-salt. And then I also have people take sulfur, organic sulfur, so that their blood can start being disinfected with iodine, and then wait about a month and then start taking the T-salt, and then it'll just kick its royal butt.
Yeah, I used to make Lugol's iodine, and what I found is that you can overdose on iodine, and that there's a certain level that you want to get to, and you don't want to use too much iodine because it starts interfering with your thyroid production.
Right. But if you don't have the iodine, then your thyroid doesn't work. And you also, with the microwave radiation these days that we're surrounded by our phone and our smart meters and all that, it damages the thyroid. And so the iodine helps, as a substitute. Because you have to remember, like, it used to be Japan had the oldest people on Earth. Well, they don't have the oldest people on Earth anymore because of Fukushima. But before that, they were living like on average like 120 years. And it was because they ate so much iodine. They would eat up to like 3,000 units of iodine a day, right? And sea vegetables and seaweed and all these other fish. And we don't get that. And this is why they also look so young. And more and more, I keep getting more and more clients in the US that have had their thyroids removed for whatever reason. Because I
If
think
the
that,
medical establishment doesn't value what a thyroid does.
oh my God, and people, if they knew what your thyroid did, you wouldn't remove it. You would do everything that you possibly could in order to fix it before you ever had it removed. Because it's a super important part of the body. But yeah, so I have teasel, yarrow. horsetail. Yeah, I don't know what else I have. I have quite a few. I did some poppies this year. I did a Nevada poppy, which is yellow, and I did a California poppy tincture. And then, so I'm kind of also messing around with a little bit of, which are not for sale. By the way, I don't sell my poppy extracts because it would be against the law. But
Because poppies are opioids.
yeah, and you know what I found through my experience this summer talking to lots of different herbalists is that, when you get an opiate that's derived, like, pharmaceutical opiates, or you get opiates from certain kinds of plants from like China, or, hardcore opiates, the difference is in a tincture, a Chinese opium plant, right? The pod, uh, if you did a tincture out of it, you could probably take 5 drops max a day. A California poppy, you could take, 25 drops over, in a day. And some of the Nevada smaller poppies you're looking at, you could probably even take 40 drops before there would be any kind of problem. So you can kind of see the difference. And the way that the tincture delivers the medicine is a lot more safer. I mean, Chinese, you have to be really careful about opium type Chinese plants. But some of the other ones can be utilized. And the whole plant, the thing I like about like the California poppies, some of the Nevada poppies that we have here, desert poppies, is that you can use the root and all the leaf matter and the flower, which, some plants I feel bad about harvesting because I'm only going to be using certain parts of it. But yeah, so I have that for, pain, and, like, I figure, who knows if I end up, really spraining my leg badly. And I carry it in my medical pouch, my herbal medical pouch. So if I'm out and about and something happens, I could take a few drops of poppy tincture that can kind of offset the pain until I can get myself where I need to go. And, kind of manage that. So it's kind of in my emergency medical kit, mostly that I utilize it.
All right. Well, thank you for having this discussion today. It has been an excellent chat. We had Gord on, I think.
I think he's still on, but he didn't get a word in edgewise. He didn't say anything.
I tried once.
What'd you say? What'd you try to say? We didn't hear you.
I'm still here.
Well, do you have anything that you want to add? We've got like 10 minutes. Sorry about that.
That's all right. It's okay. It was all very interesting to listen to. I did think I was going to get some opportunity, so I was thinking on what topics I'd bring up, which would have been because we happen to have an old growth forest that's shared with the United States close to where I live, and I thought that would be something I'd bring up, but that can be for another time.
Yeah, the collab we try to talk about a subject and then things get, thrown wherever they're going to get thrown. But
well, that's all right. It took its natural course, didn't it?
yeah, and I think it's really important for people, to start thinking about growing food and dealing with herbal medicinal plants and really paying attention to the environment. I mean, I think
I think that last sentence, pay attention to the environment, is huge. And the fact that so much of our medicine can possibly come from the environment, that just doubles, triples, quadruples the whole concept of looking after our environment. It's not just a matter of having trees to give us oxygen, it's plants to give us medicines and even foods in some cases.
Not only that, but different environments have different characteristics, and we're not trying to make one uniform environment. We
Oh,
need the
absolutely.
compilation of many different environments.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This little shared forest that we got between the United States and Canada, um, I mean, this is old growth. There's spruce trees growing in there that are 8 or 9 feet across on the stumps, and there's a few cedars in there close to that size too. And it's aging out. You go in there, right? These trees can age out after a certain point, and I was disappointed last time I went in. There was 2 big, beautiful cedars right as you enter the forest, and both of them had blown down over the course of time from when I'd last been there. I was sad to see that.
You know, though, plants like that, the cedars, have as much lifetime after they've fallen, if they're left on the ground to become animal habitat and to break down into the soils, as they have when they're alive. So when you get forests that grow to be mature total forests, we shouldn't be clearing them like we do to plant new forests. We should
No,
just let them evolve and they'll grow themselves back.
well, they're their own best manager. And even these cedars that had fallen over, um, it's going to take decades for those to decay, for one thing, and another is you will see trees take sprout in them as they do decay and start to, the fiber softens. They'll become perfect hosts for new seeds to establish new trees.
Absolutely. In fact, it might almost be worthwhile to plant something in the cedar over the course of time and see how it does, because I do think that almost everything on the ground in an old growth forest has been through a process of maturation, so that there's a symbiotic relationship between the mushrooms, the fungi, the decay factors, and also the growth factors, that they work together. They're not each unique.
Yeah, well, the cedars themselves, Lenny, they take a long time to decay to any of that. You can go into forests and there's either yellow or red. Yellow takes forever to decay, literally. Red cedar, if it's been down 100 years or so, the fiber is still usable out of that. You can still get shingle blocks out of that wood.
Pretty amazing how plants work, isn't it?
It's stunningly amazing, and it's we just fall into it as humans and utilize it as we see fit as a society. But we really don't take the time to look back and really make myself. I see the I was born into the logging industry and I exited out of it, thankfully due to an injury. Sounds weird, but it worked. And it got me out of something that I really shouldn't have been in the first place because it doesn't really fit my soul pattern. Um, I'm more in tune to well, let's put it this way. We've got a river trail here, and there's one particular area of forest in there where the trees, if you go in there awake enough to know that you can communicate with those trees, holy crap, those trees just love you to death. As soon as you walk in there, those trees are just like you're vibrating with the energy of these trees. We have a professor at the University of British Columbia who came out about 2 years ago with a paper on that very fact that we can communicate with trees and they will communicate back with us.
Yeah, I've had some firsthand experience both from the Pacific Northwest, where I lived in conifer forests, and now a little bit here in Florida, where some of the palms I've
Hmm.
been walking up to and just laying a hand onto the base of the tree, and it takes about 45 seconds to a minute or 2 minutes, and I can feel the flow of the tree starting to connect. Once I've gotten awareness with the tree, it no longer takes as long the next time. And so I've been going out to certain trees, sitting down with my journal and just leaning back and writing in the presence of that tree. And I'm sure that the tree is influencing the writing that I'm doing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, it's and the thing is when you start connecting with that, the wildlife that's around there will connect with you too.
I'm not sure how much wildlife there is. I'm in a complex of elderly folks built around a golf course, but there is
Yeah,
some wildlife.
yeah. No, I'm thinking broadly, like up even up here. Like wildlife is not that common to come across anymore. Uh, but we do have there are birds. Um, Eagles, for example. I don't know what it is in my nature, but when eagles know I'm around, they seem to get really happy. So there's a connection between me and eagles somehow in there, and other birds too. Crows. I tend to be. I've got a. I don't hunt. I rarely eat meat. I need protein, so I do indulge here and there just to keep my body sustained. But I just get open response from all kinds of nature when I go out into it. Could be
Yeah.
bears, it could be deer. I've had elk walk right out in front and give me a full broadside, two adult males, and that goes back to native connections because of the contract with the natives. They know they have a contract with them. The natives will make sure their species thrive, and they offer themselves up as food as part of. It's an ancient contract. Bridgette knows about that too. And I've had them come right out and give me a full broadside. If I'd been in the mind to have been out there hunting and had a rifle handy, I could have shot both of them and brought them home.
Yeah, that's not my world either, though. You and I think a lot alike. That we would rather have the wildlife be wildlife continually than to take it home just to make a meal out of it.
Yeah, no, the food value of it. I just feel blessed that I could share those few moments with them, just being there. That to me, that was more than I could have expected out of them. So
Elk are pretty majestic creatures. People don't realize how much bigger than horses they are.
yeah, yeah. Um, I actually quite like my life with the outdoor that I have available to me. I've got two specific areas. One is in the Okanagan region. It takes me about 3-4 hours to drive there, depending on traffic. And that's where that experience took place, was up on the old logging road that cuts through there. And then just locally close to here, even on the river trail, even though it's heavily populated with people, uh, it still offers intimacy with nature.
Yeah, pretty excellent. I like getting out in nature when I can. Recently, I haven't had near as much opportunity as when I lived out in Oregon, but I will get back to nature. I am certain there's learning experiences in every environment.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to be able to go down into some of those more tropical areas and explore it more from a naturalist point of view.
Yeah, I've been looking at some of the water running down here as part of the Everglades, and even though they've populated right on top and filled in, there's still plenty of natural flowing waterways or artificially flowing natural waterways because they've grouped it. But it's nice to have water where you can just go and sit aside of it and feel the energy of the water in the air. It's quite a bit different than when you're landlocked.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's, I mean, some of the creeks that are around here, the river that I walk beside, it's quite broad right now. We're in a cycle of blending into winter, so we've had up in regions we've been getting heavy snow, and then that melts off so that it doesn't stay cold enough to maintain that snow in the mid range of the mountains. So it melts off rather quickly, and then the water levels come up. So it's interesting to watch all that change too in there. And of
Our,
course, you got. Go ahead.
go ahead. Anyway, I was just I have to cut the collab because I have to go run and go work. So I'm gonna shut the record off actually, and then and then and then that's going to be it. And don't forget, everybody out there, that we don't have the collab next week because I will be out of town working on homeless issues and attending some meetings down in California.
Well,
All right,
good luck
everybody.
with all that.
Yeah, thanks for the chat room will stay open though, Gord, if you want to chat back and forth to Lenny, so you'll be able to keep chatting. But anyway, thanks everybody for listening to the collab. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.